Tánaiste, we're the signatories of the Genocide Convention. It's in Irish law. And what that requires signatories to do is not just join legal cases, but to take all action in its power to deter, prevent, obstruct the commission of a genocide. Now, I want to know what you're doing in that regard. What have you said to the US government, or for that matter, the Israeli government, about the plausible commission of a genocide and your demands that they stop committing genocide?
The question originally tabled was to report my discussions with the US or Israeli counterparts about the ongoing crisis in the Middle East as a result of Israel's assault on Gaza, in the West Bank and now in Lebanon, and if I make a statement on the matter. And the crisis in the Middle East, Deputy, remains a key priority for me, for our government, across our engagements, including in our discussions with the US and Israel. The scale and extent of the violence is shocking, appalling, and I've condemned it repeatedly, as is the suffering of those caught up in this war and conflict. Ireland has been very clear and consistent in calling for an immediate ceasefire, the release of hostages, and humanitarian access at scale to Gaza, where the situation remains catastrophic. I'm deeply concerned by the ongoing violence in the West Bank and by the surge in violence in recent days in Lebanon, including continuing Hezbollah rocket fire on Israel, Israel's massive aerial bombardments and ground incursions across the blue line by the Israeli Defence Forces. I've condemned Iran's missile attack on Israel, and we need to act urgently to avoid further escalation. I've called for an immediate ceasefire in Lebanon, for all to exercise restraint, and for those with influence to use it positively. A wider conflict would be disastrous for all the peoples of the region. Ongoing US engagement is essential to finding a solution to the current conflict, and I have reiterated this in all my engagements with the US and the international community, most recently during high-level week at the UN in New York last month, and the Taoiseach met President Biden this week in Washington, highlighted Ireland's position during the discussion on the conflict. I met with the then Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen on the 16th of November 2023 during my visit to the region, and I reiterated Ireland's condemnation of the terror attack by Hamas on Israel on the 7th of October and underlined the need for the unconditional release of all hostages. I also underlined my concern over the catastrophic situation in Gaza and reiterated calls for an immediate ceasefire, an issue on which Israel demonstrated early and clear leadership at EU and international level. Current Israeli Foreign Minister Israel Katz engaged with the EU foreign ministers at the Foreign Affairs Council in January of this year, enabling a further exchange on the situation in Gaza, during which I underlined Ireland's concern of potential breaches, or clear breaches, of international humanitarian law in Gaza, notably with regard to the principles of distinction, proportionality, and can we read the remainder into the... Thank
you. 1 minute.
Yeah. You see, I framed the question about the Genocide Convention. No, I framed the question in my initial because I want to know what the character of your intervention with the United States or Israel is. And we've more or less got it. Oh, we condemn this, we condemn that. Bit of this, bit of that, right? And what I'm trying to do is reframe this, Tánaiste, and say we're talking about genocide. We're signatories to the Genocide Convention. The International Court of Justice has said there's a plausible genocide taking place. So this isn't a bit of this and a bit of that. This isn't a bit of disproportionality by Israel and a little bit of, terrorism by, as you want to present it, by a Palestinian faction. This is a case of a people who've been oppressed since 1948, who've been subject in Gaza to a siege for 17 years, who are subject to illegal occupation, who are subject to apartheid, who are the oppressed.
Thank you,
and they are being oppressed by Israel. And they are now committing genocide. So what are you saying about that?
We're preparing a legal opinion to join the South African case at the International Court of Justice. You know that. We've said that. We've done a lot of work on that. We were very proactive in terms of the ICJ case, in terms of the advisory opinion, both at the UN General Assembly in the first instance, at the court itself where the AG made a submission, and subsequently in supporting and asking for the implementation of that opinion in a subsequent UN vote. And I'd also say, Deputy, that we have condemned And I've said it very clearly. The war in Gaza is a collective punishment of the people living in Gaza, and it has resulted in the murder of innocent civilians, children, men and women. There's no issue about that from my perspective. And equally, I would continue to condemn what Hamas did on October the 7th. I'd note you've never done that. And I think that's a problem for you and your party. And I also condemn what Hezbollah did. And never forget the fact that, Hezbollah created a lot of hostility for peacekeepers over the last 2 to 3 years, which resulted in the death and killing of an Irish peacekeeper because of efforts made to create hostility over the last 2 to 3 years in Lebanon. And I think we need complete de-escalation. The nature of modern warfare is horrific. It's wrong, morally wrong. The bombardment of Lebanon, the bombardment of Gaza, the further land grabs in the West Bank are all, in my view, shocking, unacceptable and need to stop.
Thank you so much, sir. Deputy.
Why would you not say, or why did Simon Harris yesterday not say to the United States, stop arming a genocide? Stop giving weapons to people to commit genocide. Even now, you still won't even use the word genocide. You won't say they're committing genocide, even though the world is saying it and it's obvious they're committing it. And you're still failing to distinguish between the oppressor and the oppressed. Now listen, when the Vietnamese fought back against the American occupation, they did some nasty things, but they were the oppressed and they had the right to fight the oppressor. When the Algerians fought against the occupation of their country, they did some pretty nasty things. But the French were the colonisers and the oppressors, and the Algerians were those fighting back. Now, who is the oppressor and who is the oppressed in the context of Palestine? The answer is Israel is the oppressor. They're the ones occupying. They're the ones committing genocide. They're the ones doing the apartheid, not the Palestinians. Right? So why you keep creating this equivalence, I do not understand, because it is misrepresenting the nature of this conflict. There would be no Palestinian armed resistance if it wasn't for the siege of Gaza, if it wasn't for apartheid, if it wasn't for illegal occupation, if it wasn't for ethnic cleansing. It wouldn't exist. Why don't you say that clearly and call out those responsible and, in the case of the United States, those who continue to enable this oppressive, brutal, genocidal regime?
And Deputy O'Mara.
I'm disturbed by Deputy Barrett's assertions when you say a few nasty things. Like murdering 1,200 people and slaughtering them, some at a music concert, is not a little nasty thing. It is an outrage and should be condemned as morally reprehensible. And I find that extraordinary, what you've just said in this House. You've essentially said that that's just a few nasty things that's justified because of the conflict between Hamas and Israel. So if you attend a music concert...
That's not what I said.
I'm drawing, that's the conclusion I'm drawing from it now. I think because you asked me to stop the equivalence. There is no equivalence from my perspective. International humanitarian law should be observed. I disagree fundamentally, and I've condemned Israelis' attack, the Israeli government attack on Gaza. We are doing everything we can through the international courts, because you mentioned genocide. There is a convention on genocide. And we're either serious about challenging and asserting that in the courts, or we're not. And I accept that the threshold in the courts is very high because of the way the convention was signed. But we are engaging in that. And the only way we have credibility in the international world, if we condemn all acts of terror, by state and by terrorist organisations.
Okay,
and that includes Hamas, that includes Hezbollah, and it equally includes the State of Israel in terms of, for example, these massive bombs that have been these bunker bombs they're called, which takes out hundreds of people in the name of taking out one commander.